what is known, and this really speaks to the challenge in trying to combat this, is that the most senior figures, the masterminds, they tend to operate in countries beyond the UK's jurisdiction and indeed beyond the EU's jurisdiction, countries like Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. And when the people most directly involved in small operations are victims, workers, schools, which is ultimately going to spread across the continent and give us Brexit and Trump.
They call for a revote in 3 weeks.
The inspiration was Ukraine's Orange Revolution. It begged us curiosity about how the country suggesting that there is an insidious Russian plot underlying politics in the West.
There's certainly a Russian plot, there's certainly a Russian intention. If you read the words of it.
Are you actually saying Donald Trump is at one thing with Putin?
No, I'm not saying it, but nobody would seriously argue that Russia is not trying to influence elections in other countries. What I'm getting at more, I think, is the baleful influence of certain cultural and literary theories in the West about whether or not anything is true. Postmodern ideas that basically nothing is true, nothing is false, interpret that. And I think that's the Russians who read all that stuff are exploiting doubt.
Would you like a media that says this is true, this is false?
Because it is interesting. I mean, in a sense, the result of
with dozens of others as well. And footage later gathered and shown in recent documentaries surviving the Supernova Festival massacre shows an incredible feat of bravery from Hanno. He sits alone at the entrance of the shelter, and as the Hamas gunmen throw grenade after grenade in, he picks them up and he throws them out. The last grenade would take his life, but his efforts saved so many others, and now his name is famous in Israel. It's daubed on walls and billboards. He was buried in a military cemetery. I've been talking to his father, Moshe, about the day and about his son.
Nobody was surprised. All his friends from China, they would say that he will run away. One of his friends said, if you would like, you could run from Gaza to Jerusalem. And that's what he was an athlete, but at the same time she said, definitely it stays and help others. Because this is the kind of boy that he was since he was a very small child. When he saw somebody's bullying somebody else, it could have been even a teacher or principal that insult a boy in school, so he would stand against the principal and say policeman that act not so well and asking for somebody for investigation in the street. He would go to the policeman and why do you pick on him? So we're always afraid that he'll get in a mess with authorities, but that was his spirit. When it all happened, we heard the siren in the mornings, and everyone was sirens around 11 o'clock. But we knew that there's going to be something from Gaza, so the siren remains, but nobody knew, even the ones that heard the news, nobody knew what happened. And only 2 days after the Monday, we got a phone call from a survivor. She told us a name, and she said your son was with me at the shelter. Thanks to my life. Managed everything, organized everything. Thanks to your what could we do? It was a samples and t-shirt. What could we still do there? But that's what she said. It was on Monday. Tuesday, they followed from us. They're standing at the entrance, waiting. Broken boat with beer, the terrorist connector. But they were afraid. They hesitated for 44 minutes. They were trying to shoot them from the outside of the shingles. 4 9 grenades and 3 RPGs to the last one killed.
And to be clear, they kept on throwing in those grenades, and he kept on gathering them up and throwing them out again.
Yes, I told all the people in the shelter, lie down, I would stand here, I would try to protect you, and if something happens to me, if I'm dead, so somebody will have to switch me. And he succeeded making the terrorist commentary for 24 minutes, and like 20 terrorists heavily armed with grenades, machine guns, RPG, and he was barehanded. And he succeeded in preventing him to the last RPG.
I can see when we talk face to face, I can see in your face the grief, obviously, of what happened, but also tinged with just an extraordinary pride, actually, in him.
Yes, and pride. First of all, for what he had done, it's not. I don't know how would I react, but I think he did what seriously about what happened and how it occurred and how we missed such a big event. And I think that we understand now that the way to peace, it's a much longer procedure. It's not a question of agreements or land or ammunition or things like that. It's something like education. You have to change the system. It must be the ones that will be in charge of education in Gaza will have to take care that the kids will be educated not to hatred. I think it's also for the Palestinian society. It's for them. If they want to have a state, they should have a state, but it would be based on the humanistic values.
What do you want Ania's legacy to be?
I think the basic legacy of Ania is that on that day, 7th of October, there was evil, armed evil, with grenades, RPGs, with hatred. There was a man who stood with love for humanity, love for people, unarmed, and he succeeded in fighting. In fighting only with the spirit, with his bare hands and spirit. He succeeded in fighting the evil, and he succeeded in saving life. He didn't succeed in saving his own life, but he succeeded in saving lives of others. And he showed us that in a kind of a class like that, you should stand for your values, and there is a chance. This is, I think, that's the legacy.
Moshe Shapiro, thank you very much for talking.
Thank you very much.
And that documentary, Surviving October the 7th, We Will Dance Again, is available on BBC.
5 to 9. When 3 close family members have had dementia, where does it leave you in terms of fearing what that family history might mean medically for you? Sally Magnuson has lived that reality after seeing her grandmother, aunt and mother suffer from Alzheimer's disease. And in a film for BBC Scotland which airs on Sunday, she has been exploring her own medical quest. She's on the line. Morning, Sally.
Good morning.
And I know you wrote about the experience of caring for your mother and what dementia means for families as well as the individuals. How big a step was it, though, for you to join a study, a scientific study?
Well, I haven't joined it yet. My film actually is about the dilemma of deciding whether to find out if I have the symptoms, the protein build-up in my brain that leads ultimately to the onset of Alzheimer's. I think, I did write 10 years ago now, Where Memories Go, about the experience that we had as a family, mirroring the experience of hundreds of thousands of families around the UK in looking after somebody with this vicious disease. And there was no hope there at that time. There was very little support, but there was also no real scientific development that could have helped my mother. And indeed that remained the case for several years afterwards. But now, 10 years later, we are on the cusp of significant game-changing scientific discoveries and drug developments that can make a difference to the next generation, to people like me coming along, not yet quite at the age that my mother was when we began to notice her personality changing. I'll be there within a few years, and what's absolutely key now is that people like me who are living normal, healthy lives think about this and consider being tested and placing themselves in a position where we can be available for research in order to develop the treatments that will stop the onset of symptoms. And that's the key thing.
And what is the hardest part of the dilemma in deciding whether you want to be tested and to know about yourself in that way? Is it the fear of finding out that yes, you are severely at risk, or even perhaps more specifically that this is your future and what that takes away from your present?
Exactly so. It isn't just about finding out that you might be at risk. Actually, when you go through the kind of research program that I am likely to begin with, a company called Scottish Brain Sciences in Scotland, which is hoping to collect around itself a cohort of thousands, at least 7,000 to start with, people, people, do that without yet something developed that can help you when you find out that you have got, if you find out that you have got amyloid plaque in your brain, which is the, you know, the sign of Alzheimer's. That is a big ask of yourself and your family, because what you know, you can't unknow. You don't know the effect it will have on you. You don't know whether every time you forget a word, which we all start to do in our 60s, or lose your glasses. There's people around you going, oh, that's not
Sally, I'm going to stop you there, but I'm going to say that the programme is going to be on air on Sunday on BBC Scotland and Amazon.
Dan McCallum, Jack Evans, editor, studio director here in my program from the Shannon Company.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. The day of ceremonies are being held across Israel to mark the first anniversary of the Hamas attacks. A year ago today, around 1,200 people were killed and another 250 taken to Gaza. About 100 are still being held hostage there. They include the only British Israeli captive, 28-year-old Emily Damari. Her mother Mandy says the UK isn't doing enough to bring her home. The Defence Secretary John Healey insists the government is still trying to secure her release.
I'd say to Mandy Damari that we're working hard with the Israelis, we're working hard with the Gulf states. We've continued the discussions alongside allies like the US to do everything we can to, in the end, get a ceasefire in Gaza that allows all the hostages to be released.
The Israeli military is investigating how 5 rockets fired by the Hezbollah group in Lebanon managed to penetrate Israel's air defences and reach the port city of Haifa last night. Rockets hit a restaurant, a house and the main road, injuring several people. Another rocket exploded in the northern Israeli city of Tiberias. 1 person was hurt. Hezbollah said it was aiming at military facilities. Also, fresh Israeli strikes on Beirut overnight. The Prime Minister is beginning work with his new team, number 10, after the resignation of Sue Gray as his Chief of Staff. She said intense commentary around her position risked becoming a distraction to the government. Inquests into the deaths of dozens of patients who were operated on by the disgraced surgeon Ian Patterson are due to begin in Birmingham. Patterson, who carried out unregulated and unnecessary operations, was jailed in 2017 for wounding with intent and unlawful wounding. The European Space Agency is due to launch a spacecraft today to discover what happened when a NASA probe was deliberately smashed into an asteroid 2 years ago. The mission was to see if one heading for Earth could be deflected off course. BBC News.
This is BBC Radio 4. Lucy Worsley's new series uncovering conwomen, thieves and hustlers from the past continues this afternoon. Last week we heard about the hidden all-female gang of shoplifters. Today, Lucy asks, who exactly was the young woman who turned up in a town in Georgian England calling herself Princess Caribou? Her story was that she'd been abducted from a palace in Indonesia. Lady Swindlers is at 3:30 this afternoon. First, it's Start the Week with Amanda Vicker.
Hello. Nearly 3/4 of the Earth's surface is water, and all of my guests have explored its shallows and depths. Today we'll be investigating the very beginning of life underwater, the game of evolution and the spread of sentience, and the responsibility we humans have over the future of life on land and sea. Richard Powers is a Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist who spent part of his childhood snorkeling in the South China Sea. A gift from his sister, a picture book of coral reefs inspired his latest novel, Playground. Heather Calderway is a pioneering marine biologist, the lead on the Bertarelli Foundation's marine science program focused on the Indian Ocean. But she's also the initiator of Project Seahorse, bent on protecting the habitats of these delicate creatures. Peter Godfrey Smith is often described as the scuba diving philosopher, a professor at the University of Sydney, an author of Living on Earth, Life, Consciousness and the Making of the Natural World, the conclusion to his 3-part exploration of the origins of intelligence on Earth. Well, welcome to you all. I feel as if you're all united in your reverence to the majesty of the oceans. But Heather, how much appears of your alien mind?
most of it, really, depending on what scale you look at. Firstly, there's the depths that are so difficult to actually get to and study in any way, shape or form, although we are starting to make progress there. And then I guess there's also on that micro scale, even just zooming in on one head of coral and understanding all the many invertebrates and the tiny crabs and shrimps. Most of them are unstudied, unexplored and unknown to science. So each time people are doing oceanographic or marine expeditions, they're finding something new. That's why I love working in the ocean so much.
Peter, how has the view from below transfigured your understanding of life?
I think it's really changed my understanding of life is encounters with particular animals. Octopuses, centrally, giant cuttlefish, also various other animals, including shrimp, various kinds of fish. There are some big gropers around one of my regular dive sites in Manly that have the same kind of inquisitive interest in humans, in divers, that some octopuses have. And that sense of an encounter has always been for me one of the things that always brings me back, and one of the main aspects of my experience at the sea.
Richard, you're joining us from landlocked in the sea. Has water always spoken to you?
It was a level I had a marvelous opportunity to move from the north side of Chicago to Bangkok, Thailand, where I immediately took to the South Hemisphere and spent as many weekends and holidays there as I could. You mentioned a statistic in the intro about almost 3/4 of the surface of the earth being covered by water. But we have to add other dimensions to that too. The envelope for large life on land is pretty narrow. Whereas the average depth of the ocean is just a little under 4,000 meters to 2.25 kilometers. And it's a broad implication that life goes all the way down and affecting tremendous numbers. And so as a novelist, this is my 14th book. As I've struggled with trying to tell stories that position human beings in the Southern Planet, on this living planet, it was kind of a shock to me to get to this point and realize I've just been describing 1 or 2% of the available biosphere, and in fact, most of the planet's history have been operating under very different rules in a place that's especially tricky for novelists to describe.
It's fair to say that the ocean is almost a character in your novel. Can you explain the basic plot to us?
Sure, there are actually 3 different narrative forms. There's a story of a friendship, an unlikely friendship between 2 boys of very different socioeconomic classes in the city of Chicago, and the ups and downs of that friendship over decades and decades. The second frame involves the diver, marine scientist, Evelyn O'Neill, who was one of the very first human beings to use an aquarium. She happens to be the daughter of an engineer in Montreal who was working with Cousteau in the manufacture of the earliest commercial aquariums, and who falls in love with the ocean and who dedicates the rest of her life to trying to study it and understand it. But the third frame concerns a tiny island in French Polynesia, about half the size of Manhattan, that had been seriously exploited for its phosphates throughout the 20th century. And with the collapse of that extraction industry, the island itself collapses down to about 80 people. These people are presented with the opportunity to take part in a seasteading project using the island as kind of base of operations. Seasteading is this dream kind of fermented in Silicon Valley along the Mediterranean coast of The tension of the book, I think, comes from trying to figure out how these two fairly disparate single stories come together. So the book itself is a kind of interplay. But as I was turning my attention to the scene and trying to think about life on very long terms, I was more and more intrigued by the way in which play functions as a driving force in evolution as a whole. And I began thinking about a classic book by the Dutch art historian Johan Huizinga, written just before the Second World War, called Homo Ludens, in which Huizinga says not only is play older than civilization, but it's older than humanity. And it was for me, in fact, in reading Peter's Other Minds. I've read both Other Minds and Metazor, and they were instrumental in my thinking and maturing my thinking for this book. I wish I had read the third volume of Living on Earth prior to writing the book. I think the novel would have been stronger as a result. It was an extraordinary scene in Peter's first of this trilogy, involving an astonishing encounter with a cuttlefish that got me thinking about how play might function in the non-human world, and what we can learn about ourselves by looking at seemingly inexplicable behavior outside of ourselves.
So, Peter, play.
I agree that play has a great importance in animal and the non-human animal world, and it's been something that's been neglected and denied for a long time. It's had to be sort of pressed upon us. Octopuses are very good examples of animals that play. There was an experiment done some years ago by Jennifer Mather and Roland Anderson, where an octopus, or some octopuses, not all, and the ones that were studied, were essentially bouncing an analog of bouncing a ball. They were jetting the ball against the valve bringing water into a tank, which then brought the object, actually it was a pill bottle rather than a ball, brought it back to them. And there was this repetitive just intervention, messing around with this object in novel and interesting ways that they rightly, I think, concluded was a case of play. The use that Eveline gives an analog of in Richard's book, this was a situation where a giant cuttlefish was producing an extraordinary symphonic series of colours and patterns. Now, I was off to the side just watching for a long time, and the colours and patterns, I'm pretty sure, were not being produced for or at or to anyone. I don't know to what extent the animal was fully awake, whether it was a kind of dozy experience, but it stayed with me as a kind of a small-scale piece of behavioural extravagance, something that's just so far from the somewhat utilitarian picture of animal behaviour that we're often encouraged to have.
Richard, you say in your novel, if you want to make something smarter, teach it to play. I wonder if Heather's encountered anything like that under the book.
Definitely, and I think it's those magical moments that keep being somebody who gets to work, be underwater as part of my day-to-day job is something that's so special. And I really identified with the story when Eveline encountered a manta ray and it was playing with the bubbles from her scuba. Some of the remote areas I've worked where there's very limited interaction with marine life with people at all, you see very different behaviours, and it has changed where animals are fish, their flight responses, they basically are swimming away from people because they know that they'll get caught. There's that interaction there. And in places where there's no fishing, there's protection, you see much older fish, they have that sort of gnarly look, they've lived a life, and you swim much closer to them, they'll come up to you, the first time I got in the water in Checkers Archipelago, dropped in, and rather than everything sort of swimming away, there was lots of curiosity and fish coming up and what is this strange thing I see before me? So absolutely, I think there is that understanding of the behaviours and intelligence of life in water is important.
It's a paradox though, isn't it? That the technology that can be used to inflict harm has also opened our eyes to the wonders of the deep. I wonder what you think about that, Richard.
every new human technology, or all the way back to things that we don't even think of technologies anymore, has presented us with new affordances. I was delighted, I think, that Peter Ducci mentioned Socrates and Williams about writing at one point. And this idea that our ability to control time and space and other creatures changes with each new invention, and yet that there are positive affordances and negative affordances in every technological transformation. The problem is these leverages larger and larger as our technology is advanced. So this book struggles with, in particular, AI and the way in which we're introducing a new component into our ability to act in the world, but we're creating something that in some ways doesn't have this. But, I also think of things that we wouldn't necessarily think about as cutting edge that are putting tremendous pressure on the ocean. For instance, I was quite moved to read about Adam's work with ghost nets. And this is a problem, I think, the problem that he starts along, but I think at the present, putting in about 1 million tons of ghost net into the ocean every year.
What are ghost nets? Ghost nets are when fishing gear is abandoned or lost or discarded at sea, so it carries on fishing but benefits no one. So it's really something that I think everybody involved in both fishing and in ocean conservation needs to solve together. So that's a really serious problem and a big part of the plastic problem, because increasingly, well, pretty much all fishing gear now is made of plastic. So that's part of the plastic pollution problem, where you have a product that's used for a short period of time and then persists for hundreds or thousands of years in the environment. And once it's in the ocean, it becomes very, very difficult to clear up, particularly when it breaks down to smaller plastic particles.
Well, we're going to come back to that, but I wanted to ask you a question which relates to Richard's character of the marine biologist Evelyn, because she encounters endless misogyny, some of which is rather kind of sly and hilarious. On an all-female mission to the Caribbean, the press excitedly dubbed the women aquabelles, aquababes, aquanettes, and even aquanauties. I wonder if you can relate to this, Heather.
Yes. Unfortunately, I mean, obviously that was, linked to Sylvia Earle's remarkable pioneering work for what women in science can do underwater, and she continues to be a role model for many of us in who are working there now. But I think the challenges are changing from just being a woman in marine science to being more senior. So there's that sort of glass ceiling that's been there for a long time, but now it's also been from different parts of the world. So marine science has typically been from the global north, and actually if your coastline is in Thailand or in Bangladesh or in French Polynesia, where are those female marine scientists coming from? What opportunities do those have? And that's something that we really have to look at those next generation. That's still facing a lot of biases and prejudice for career opportunities for women from those nations which really need to be focused on marine science.
Peter, let's turn to the final work in your trilogy, which explores the origins of intelligence on Earth, living on Earth. And you call this the history of action, a history of organisms as causes rather than evolutionary products. What do you mean?
I think of the book as partly, as you say, a history of action, also a history of choice, a history of ways in which organisms have directed change, first in their local environments and then more generally. Part of the motivating thought behind the book was the sense that I've written 2 books about the mind as a product, as something that evolution has brought into existence. You're sort of looking at what gave rise to this extraordinary feature of the world: mentality, experience, cognition. But there's a second side to the story, which is not the mind as product, but the mind as cause, the mind as something that changes the way events occur in the world, makes things happen. And the way I approach that is by thinking of the mind as cause, that as an aspect of the broader category of living activity as a cause. So the book starts with early events in the history of living activity as a causal factor in the earth. And the huge one that gets the ball rolling, and that got the ball rolling for much of what ensued on this planet, was the creation of our oxygen-rich atmosphere, when cyanobacteria, tiny microorganisms, invented a new kind of photosynthesis over 2 billion years ago. That filling of the atmosphere and the oceans with higher levels of oxygen, it didn't just change life, it changed geological and chemical cycles, it changed the way pretty much everything works on the planet. So the thought behind the book was to start with this non-conscious but organic, momentous way that life has changed the earth, then work through the evolution of animals, animal action, choice, eventually reaching the peculiar and peculiarly powerful case of human choice and human action.
But you begin with this extraordinary moment in the development of life as we know it, and how life moves from water to land. But I was absolutely amazed to discover that some creatures begin in water, then go to land, and then go back into the water. And so manatees are closer to elephants, I read, in evolutionary terms, and that dolphins once had legs.
Right, dolphins and other whales are fairly closely related to hippos. And there's one of the things, actually, I learnt this in the course of writing this part of the book. It wasn't just that there was a single particular group of hippo-ish mammals that went back to the sea after a certain point. I think there were 3 distinct and somewhat separate groups who went back. There were some weasel relatives, some elephant relatives, some hippo relatives, all who thought at a certain point, you know, I think I'm going to head back to where it all started, which was the sea.
I wondered how you differ really from what evolutionary biologists have said before, or are you basically in agreement with them?
I see my work in this area as drawing a lot on what I think of as a fairly mainstream Darwinian or neo-Darwinian picture of evolution. People sometimes raise this with me. To what extent am I trying to set a new path or a new road within evolutionary theory itself? And the answer to that is not very much. I think that the 2 huge ideas that Charles Darwin had, firstly the genealogical interpretation of the tree of life, the fact that all living things, all animals, but also other living things are related by common ancestry, that was one of the most extraordinary and accurate, real